Why don't we call the meeting to order? I'll do that first for the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, and then the Concord Housing Authority can do likewise. It is 4:02 on Monday, the 13th of December, 2021. This is a joint meeting of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust with the Housing Authority. Let me first call to order the trust and do a roll. Linda Escobedo.
Present.
Mike Lawson.
Present.
Stephen Crane.
Present.
And Keith Bergman present. So all four of our members are present. So let me turn it over to the Housing Authority to call your meeting to order and call your roll as well.
All right, thank you. I'll call our meeting to order. Take a roll call. I'll start with me. Rick Geisler here. Charles Phillips.
Here.
Edward Larner.
Here.
Stephen Bader.
Here.
Stephanie Schrobat.
Here.
Great.
Very good. Thanks very much. And thanks also to Jennifer Polito for helping us schedule this joint meeting and for being here with us. And
no, thank you for having me.
And we're and if it's all right, what I'd like to do, I'm just going to share my screen and just sort of try to frame what we're about here. That, as you may recall from the the Concord Housing Roundtable a couple of weeks ago. Actually, let me back up. We're the new kid on the block, the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. We were established by the 2020 town meeting bylaw, and our mission is to work on creating a low and moderate income housing and community housing as defined under the CPA. And our entity, the trust, is meant to complement the town's existing affordable housing groups. And hopefully and I underscore this, with sustained funding sources in the future, the trust would be able to act quickly when affordable housing opportunities arise. Since if we have funds, say from the, if the home rule petitions or state legislation is passed for real estate transfer fee to fund the trust, or building a permit surcharge to fund the trust, then we would have a source that did not require a vote of town meeting to put it into the fund. And what's more, we would have the ability, if there were funds available, to approve particular projects without waiting for a town meeting. And so that's and if we were ever to require property, we don't need a town meeting vote. We would only need select board approval to do it. So we're sort of we're something new to Concord, new in the mix. But we're very much trying to see how we fit into the overall picture. And the bylaw that was passed at the 2020 town meeting directs us to develop goals and policy statements that are consistent with the town's adopted housing goals. And those are subject, those guidelines are subject to approval by the select board. So what we wanted to do is to look at what the town's adopted housing goals are, and we've sort of identified three areas: the 2015 housing production plan, the 2018 housing element of our master plan, and even the 2021 Community Preservation Committee's guidelines for housing projects. So we're sort of looking at that and as a guide. And as we described a bit at the Housing Roundtable, we're looking to have a series of joint meetings. In fact, we've got three this week. We're meeting with the Housing Authority today, the Housing Foundation tomorrow, and with the Housing Development Corporation on Thursday of this week. And we're looking to get some input from each of those groups on which of the adopted housing goals the trust should be prioritizing in drafting a proposed set of guidelines for select board approval. And I think in particular, we want to stress that this is something that we're looking to do in the short term, and that so that we can get up and operating. We've discussed that maybe we would like to get get a proposed set of guidelines to the select board by January, so that we can be acting on begin to act on funding applications. But what we're also aware of is that there's something else going on. There's another process that will be occurring in the very near future, and that is that the housing production plan of the towns will be updated in the coming months. And that's going to be it's going to be based on the latest census data from the 2020 census. Once that comes out, a lot of information that will allow the town to update the housing production plan from the version that was adopted in 2015, and that process will probably all be involved with some degree. And we're sort of flagging from the outset that when that housing production plan is updated in the coming months, we'll probably want to take another look at whatever guidelines we adopt now or in the short term, and propose any necessary revisions that reflect that new information. But we do think it's important to sort of get going and to be a part of the housing pantheon here in Concord. And so just to this is information that we've shared in prep for the meeting, but just that Liz Rust had summarized for us what the housing goals are. These are the Envision Concord 2018 goals. We can come back to these for reference as necessary. These are the goals from the housing production plan in 2015. And these are the guidelines that the community preservation uses for housing funding applications. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. That's a resource we can pull back up as need be. But we're really looking for any input that you might have on what you think our guidelines should say, what goals are important. And that really should be mindful of what, how can we be of service to the goals that you have that are reflected of townwide goals. So be happy to hear about any things that you've got in the pipelines that may now or in the future result in us seeing you with for a funding application should it come to that. The other issue I'd want to put out there is that to the extent to which there can be quantifiable goals, that might be something we want to try. And although that may not come out until the housing production plan, is there some notion of how many units per year should the town be developing of affordable housing? Part of that is certainly a goal that the town wants to stay above the 10% under Chapter 40B. And as more housing overall in town is built, we need to make sure that there are enough countable units on the subsidized housing inventory to be able to stay above 10%. So that's sort of a general overview of what we're trying to do, and we just love to get some feedback from the Housing Authority on what thoughts you might have about the mission that we're undertaking, and how we can be of service. And I'll just open it up. Maybe start with Rick.
Sure. I guess I just had a couple of I don't know if they are all applied to your primary goal of establishing guidelines for giving out money. But I have a couple of questions. I'm wondering, I noticed that some municipal housing trusts, committees, commissions create their own 5-year plans. Is that something that Concord's is going to do, or are you relying totally on the town's housing production plan to make goals? So I'll just do one at a time rather than.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if any of our members have any thoughts about that. I have some, but I think I have a response. But if Linda or Mike or Stephen wanted to address that. Do I see any hands? Linda, are you raising your hand? Okay.
Sure. Well, I think, we're a town with multiple housing groups, which is part of our strengths in terms of each one focusing on different aspects. And along with that, because we have 3 different places where we're citing goals that have been identified, I think the town has really looked at all 3 of those iterations as being important to how they do make decisions going forward. And so we haven't had a chance to talk about this as a board yet, but once we get input from everybody, I'm thinking that, keeping that strength will be one area that we want to do. And so I don't know if I've answered your question, Rick, but.
No, not really, but that's okay.
Those are some initial thoughts. So in terms of whether we would actually create a 5-year plan, I think, again, we're going to need to talk about that as a board. But that's why I started where I did. I think the town has relied on pulling together these 3 different, and now maybe a 4th entity in terms of all of those goals. And since we're walking into a year where we're going to do a new housing production plan, chances are they're going to come together in a more cohesive way.
Okay. And my next comment would be, I'm strongly in favor of trying to establish quantifiable goals. I guess I'm wondering how you would even begin to give out money without having goals, specific goals. I guess, the difference between the word goal and guideline, I guess, is coming up there. So that's just, you don't have to answer that question. That's just me reacting to how the trust works in the short term before goals are established or whatever. I have lots of little comments which I can bring up later, but I also, my biggest comment, I think, is wondering at what point the town engages professional planning assistance to create affordable housing. I feel like we have an awful lot of committees with volunteers. We do have town planners in the town, but I don't believe we have a town planner who is focused on creating affordable housing. And I'm wondering how we really smartly go about creating affordable housing without hiring someone who knows how a town should do this and giving us guidance. And I guess I'm questioning, do we even have anyone in town who's well-versed enough to spend millions of dollars on affordable housing without professional input? So that was my biggest comment, and I'll let other people talk now.
Thanks, Rick. Stephanie, and we'll get back to you, Rick, on those points.
Sure.
Stephanie, please.
Thank you, Keith. And this maybe kind of dovetails with what Rick was saying. I think, I want to make sure I'm clear on what will make you uniquely you compared to the other organizations in town. And one of the things I gathered from your initial comments was the concept of making nimble decisions outside of needing to wait for town meeting. That was something that sounded like maybe uniquely you, is that you don't have to wait for town meeting to convene to actually make those decisions. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, that is something that the Housing Trust uniquely has compared to almost any other housing entity. I mean, we're following a state statute that was adopted, and that isn't, and the state in allowing affordable housing trust to be established, recognize that, you can't wait always to,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess for me, that is almost the headline for you in terms of how you then move forward with your own mission and your own, role. To the extent you're a decider about projects, the criteria you use is going to be critically important, because those criteria have to be perceived by a whole host of stakeholders as super fair, right? Fair and thoughtful, and taking into account all of the things that were in Envision 2020 in terms of goals, thinking about any of the real life stuff that's happening, like the bugaboos today of COVID and whatever else, and how it all kind of like fits together. So I just needed to say out loud that for me, the biggest issue was the concept of being able to act quickly. And that given that, what do you need to build in order to make that credible and real and sustainable long-term?
Very good. I appreciate that. And that goes along a lot with some of the points that Rick raised about, the capacity to, sort of move agilely and quickly, but intelligently, and with professional backup. Thank you for that. Others to put things on the table for discussion today? Stefan and then Edward. Stefan.
I think you almost have to have a dual, two roadmaps. One, a roadmap and priorities in a low funding environment, and one in a hopefully fully funded environment. Because it's lofty to have a 5-year production goal or something, but if you're only getting $500,000 a year and nothing shakes out in the legislature, then that's kind of irrelevant almost. If the objective is something on a grander, I don't want to say grander scale, a bigger scale. So given that constraint, I would submit that for the low funding environment, there is a extremely limited number of units that can be assisted or built or renovated or whatever. And it seems to me that low hanging fruit might be low cost single families houses that are ripe for developer demolition, scrape and McMansionization. I think if you could put some effort, some funds in those, you might get 2 or 3 units, whereas anything else, if you may not get that. And the bigger projects are going to, the loftier goals are going to need a whole lot more money than you have in the next 18 months, realistically speaking. That's my 2 cents.
I appreciate that, Stefan. Thank you. Edward?
A couple of things. Rick was asking about, who will be the professional in the crowd that makes decisions. And I know that Liz Russ, as our regional housing coordinator, we share with quite a few other communities now. but she's been very good about looking after Concord. And a couple of years ago, she came up with a list, or not a list, but basically a projection of how what our housing needs would be in the near future. And it was about 100 to 120 new affordable units. As far as Stefan's point about the funding, I'm kind of becoming a fan of mixed use with like the Junction Village project with its low, median, and open market, 1/3 of each. I think that Liz was envisioning something like that. I know we've been talking about Crosby, the market area there being redeveloped and putting in mixed use units, and I assume that would be a fair share of low income. Which brings me to the next question. I really don't always understand what median income housing is. It median to our community, a median to Boston? Keith, it says that their mission includes both low income and median income housing, affordable housing. So maybe I can ask that as a question to define that. I know people have been talking about this, and I get a little bit confused about how we actually define median income.
Yeah, I think or if I could, we have low and moderate income housing, which is I think up to 80% of area median, and community housing under the CPA, which is up to, I believe, 100% of the area median. So a lot of subsidized housing that certainly that the Housing Authority and other entities can go after tends to be in the low and moderate income, but it's the community preservation is, I think, you perhaps even uniquely up to 100%. But that can be something, and that indeed all three are within the purview of the trust. That trust funds could be used for community housing at 100% or low and moderate income at, say, at less than that 60-80% of housing.
So then we also define, Keith, if I may add,
Yeah.
Concord Affordable, which is up to 140%, but nobody talks about how you fund that amount between 100% from the community preservation and the 140. That really gets picked up in mixed housing developments such as Christopher Heights.
Right. It's yeah, that's right. That's sort of what we're focused on here, and is the subsidized housing for which you need to that you need to pay for, that you need to bring in funds to pay for it, but the production of affordable housing is much broader than that. It's like what can private developers produce without any public expenditure, because they need it in order to get regulatory approval of multifamily housing, for example. And that's a whole, while it's not something that we have control over because we're a funding agency, it's something that we can be a part of. That if, and it sort of goes to I think the question of how Concord as a town meets it, identifies its affordable housing needs, and then deigns to try to meet them. It's going to be a combination of things that require public funds and things that can be produced through the private sector or frankly other donations. One of the things that I wanted to put out there, I've been thinking a lot about, and I do want to come back to the points that you've raised, but because of your recent experience with where the Housing Authority found out that $750,000 per unit is too much, right? That or at least that when you had an application or funding application that went to the select board, I guess for some of the article fund, affordable housing article funds that have since been transferred to the trust, that there was concern about if the total cost of producing a unit is $750,000 for an affordable unit, at some notion that it was thought that, well, that's too much. And what it got me thinking about is, well, how much is then the per unit cost is an important thing for us to be looking at, perhaps from two standpoints. One is the land cost, and the other is what's the development cost. And I haven't brought this up before, but I've been thinking about in a meeting like this, that when we do put together guidelines, I'm wondering if we need to try to, especially if they're quantifiable, if we needed to look at, well, what's the best application that we could get? What would the cost of land be for the application that we would most like to fund? It's probably zero. It's probably donated land, surplus town land, or something that or purchased with donated funds that were not, or whatever, and that at the other end of the spectrum is market rate, fully market rate housing with no discount. And somewhere that's a potential continuum for looking at the land cost. But the other part of it is the development costs. And at one end might be the experience that you've had recently of, at least the select board says 750,000 was too much for creation of a single unit to warrant a further expenditure of affordable housing funds from a town source. Well, then what are the acceptable per unit costs? And I think we somehow need to be getting into those areas in ways that we haven't before. But and maybe it's not fair, but I know that you're looking at, because you got a no answer at the select board, you're looking at what do you do next. And I'm just wondering what some of the ideas that you have about how you're approaching that, and maybe that can help inform us of things that we ought to be thinking about.
Sure. Yeah. So just to clarify the numbers, from the town's point of view, our new house proposed for Commonwealth Avenue was a total project cost of a little over $700,000 estimated. And that's based on preliminary designs, not final construction drawings. $300,000 of community preservation money, but not all of that 700,000 was going to be town money. There's 200,000 was proposed to be a combination of various home fund applications. So the town's input was, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was getting close to 450,000, something like that. So you probably do have to have in mind some sort of in guidelines, what is your per unit cap that you're going to spend on something. When you're the CPA, I think you can kind of say, well, we'll put the money into the best bang for the buck this year. But when you're doing one project at a time, it's hard to know what the best bang for the buck is. Just as it was hard for the select board to know whether our request for an additional 140,000, which was actually the actual money turned down, that was the extra money we needed to keep the project going. It's hard to know when there's nothing else to compare to, whether that's a good use of money or not. And you know, only time can tell whether, shoot, we should have spent that $140,000 because, you know, now we're going to spend this on this, and yikes, it's even more than that. So the town would have gotten a unit for less than $500,000, an SHI unit on Commonwealth Avenue, and still could. I mean, it's not like one vote is the be all end all of the project. We're currently trying to see if Habitat is interested in the project. So that would be more like the 10 something or other Main Street project that Habitat's doing right now, where you see, the town basically bought the land and gave it to Habitat to build a 2-unit house. So similarly, we are proposing to Habitat that they take a look at it and see if they would like to build the new house themselves and sell that as an affordable unit. It wouldn't be a rental unit as it would have been if it was ours, but it would be a low-income buyer would buy the Habitat house, and it would be, you know, still count on the SHI, and it's definitely would be affordable. You know, low-income owner would be in that house, so it would be a good thing. So we're waiting to hear on that. That's where we stand, and if that doesn't come through, then we'll look at whether we should still go ahead and complete the design and get the bids and go back to the town maybe and try again, or come back to you guys and try. And, you know, maybe time will make the numbers seem a little different, or maybe they won't. We haven't really thought that far ahead. So we're seeing how we do there.
Okay, thanks, Rick. I see a bunch of hands. Stephanie first, then Edward, then Charles.
Thanks, Keith. Just 3 comments based on some things I've heard. The first is that the Commonwealth Avenue house, it's my understanding that that's a pretty rare occurrence for the Housing Authority to actually get into the, you know, having the priority and the role of actually looking for dollars to build a home. Just saying, and I just wanted to make that statement based on a handful of comments we as a board made a week or so ago, you know, for Keith's sake, to know that that isn't something that we necessarily do on a regular basis. The other thing, and to the extent I'm sort of new to this, it seems to me the $750 is what I would consider almost, or it probably is the market rate for building a home. You know, a tiny little home. And that I guess I wonder sometimes why we don't get a government rate. You know, why isn't it there's some sort of purchasing power or some sort of regional, you know, government, you know, because we are who we are, that would help us get something a little cheaper in terms of a unit price. And that's more, I think, Keith, to maybe you guys noodle over that, you know, in a different place. And then the third comment I had related to this whole funding piece and this kind of unusual position we happen to be in nationally, and, you know, certainly here in Massachusetts too. And that is, and Jennifer knows a lot about this in terms of the ARPA monies, you know, the rescue plan money from the federal government. And I don't know enough about the guidelines or the rules there, but to what extent are there dollars that may be a relatively maybe one-off, you know, maybe a one-off way to take a bite at the apple for dollars to help us out for what we see as a 5-year plan. To go back to something I was thinking Rick said around, you know, what is our time frame? But are there dollars now that we aren't thinking about procuring for us that we should be?
Very good. Excellent suggestion too. And I'll mention that one of the things that is on the radar screen for the trust is to frankly try to identify other or alternative funding sources for us, because right now, if we think in maybe even the next several years, we might only have $500,000 a year at most from town meeting for the trust, and won't get, and if we don't get the home rule petitions, are there other places that we could look? And, and state and federal dollars, one time, maybe that's an opportunity for Concord to do something big or on another.
Yeah, and I just worry that $750,000 number, if it is what it is for us, that number will go up, will only go up.
Yeah, it's funny, you mentioned the government rate. Sadly, whatever the highest rate is the government rate, or at least for a
Double the normal rate, that's the government
Well,
rate.
Yeah, and let me just,
entity.
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but my perspective is healthcare, and the purchasing of healthcare services from the government. And, and typically because it's such a big payer, as they say, their rates are lower. So that's kind of where my head was. So I'm learning, I'll learn.
So Keith, if I could just touch on that, the public construction requires that projects get bid out. And so when it comes time to buy the lumber and the drywall and the cement, it is a private contractor that is buying it, not the government. And so that's why we don't end up getting a government rate, because we're not really, like, the CHA isn't going to purchase those materials to build the house. You're going to contract with a vendor or a contractor to build the house, and that person has to pay, private sector rate, market rates for those things. And that's, I've said many times, whether it's Chapter 149 public construction or Chapter 30B for goods and services, the procurement laws in Massachusetts are designed to prevent fraud, not to get things done. That's the world we live in.
Thanks, Stephen. Edward, and then Charles.
Just a little bit adding on what Stephanie was asking about the discount. It just seems the opposite. Just as Stephen said, everybody else here seems to agree that we were going to pay more than we would if we were a private developer. Looking at this whole process, it came in originally thinking that the projected cost was going to be somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 worth of land being donated from the Giroux Park. And one of the reasons that we were talking about this is that there was a house on that land, and it was kind of in the way, and it was old and run down. And the talk was it was going to cost at least $500,000 in order to bring it up to a standard to be rented out as subsidized housing. So there was kind of a rush to get rid of that house. It was torn down very quickly after the property was. So we're now kind of stuck with this house in the corner there, and with the price right now double what we had anticipated would be. We're looking at this inflation. It's of 100% inflation basically for construction right now, and I think it's mostly because of the fact that the real estate market is really hot, and the prices seem to be a little bit out of control. We hope that eventually they will come down. I think Rick mentioned maybe get it down to around 600,000. I think Charles probably. I'm going to give the floor to Charles because he wants to speak next, because he's an expert on the Habitat project on Main Street and some of the other projects in town. Property that is been identified as potential sites for affordable housing.
Thanks, Charles.
Well, I want to introduce a rather different subject, which is the need of the housing authority to maintain and perhaps reconstruct occasionally our existing properties. So far as I can tell, we've been pretty successful at obtaining state and federal funds for those purposes. But we really haven't talked about this, but in our committee, but we could have, perhaps in theory, a 5-year plan for upgrading or major maintenance, shall we say, to groups of our units. And we might not get enough housing, enough money from state and federal sources. So the question is, we might want to be in line for some of your funds. It's different, the different issue. It's maintenance. It's it's maintaining housing so that it's still usable as opposed to building new housing.
Right, and what's worth mentioning is that I know, for example, that community preservation funds cannot be used for maintenance per se, but but as far as I'm aware, the housing trust funds would not necessarily have that restriction. But I think the emphasis would be that if there's major capital work that you need in order to keep the units usable and open, then maintaining those units is an important part of the mission, because otherwise we lose them. So I certainly think that's something that's important for us to have on our radar screen. Have you applied for and gotten CPA funds in memory here in Concord? Has the Housing Authority applied for CPA funds as needed for some of your capital projects?
We did get quite a bit of money for the Peter Buckley project. And that turned out to be very successful. And after that was completed, we kind of stepped back because we felt we had maybe gotten more of our share. The first one we put in for was an 1860s house that we wanted renovated. And of course, this was, as Keith said, that was turned down because it was a renovation rather than actually preservation. I'm not sure exactly how the wording was, but and maybe Jennifer could talk a little bit about capital funding, capital fund, the 5-year plan the state operates on maintenance projects, our capital funding plan.
Yeah, sure. So we're in a system called formula funding. So each housing authority is designated a certain amount of money based on unit counts. So because we're a smaller agency, we have a smaller amount of state units. We don't get a ton of money. And when we do, we have to save it up. For instance, we have a bathroom project going on right now that ended up being over $400,000, and it took up 3.5 years of our formula funding. So we couldn't do anything else as far as a big capital project at the same time because it took up so much. And I know there's definitely things down the line, like windows and key locks and things like that. There's definitely plenty of things, but it comes down to how much we have for formula funding, how much we have in reserves, and basically making decisions on what's priority to get done.
Thanks for that. And in addition, have there been, do you have the ability to apply competitively perhaps for state funding for capital needs of your facilities?
So sometimes they'll come out with some stuff, like for instance, ARPA will come out and that's going to be used for capital stuff, but what they'll do is they'll say, your housing authority is awarded this amount of money for X. And then if you want to apply to do XYZ, here's the RFP. And then we would have to submit and wait to see if we were awarded it. So I think ARPA is going to be two different parts. It hasn't come out yet, naturally. So we don't have much guidance. It's just kind of chatter. But that's what it's going to kind of look like. We'll get a certain amount of money allocated for maybe fire alarms or upgrading some other kind of system. And then the other big chunk of money we'll need to apply for and give a reason as to what we need it for. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Rick?
Yeah, so I'll just shift topics again, going back to your guidelines and the concept that you don't have a lot of money right now, and perhaps one of your guidelines will be to try to get the most out of what you have. I mean, let's say you have $500,000. There's only occasionally and maybe disappearing the idea that you can buy a unit in Concord for $500,000. I think there is possible. There's one unit at Concord Green right now that's $500,000. That's one use for $500,000. But I noticed when I was looking at Wenham's 5-year plan, they threw out and I don't know if this works or worked for them, but they threw out the idea that they in order to get more leverage out of the money, that they would try to use some of their funds for buying down upcoming development units and upcoming developments where they the town zoning isn't strong enough to get the developers to do a lot of affordable housing. But if you can have a development that has a couple of units that are affordable in it by negotiation with the town, and then you use your housing trust money to buy down a few more, you could potentially turn a small project into a project that has more than 25% affordable units, which would then, if they're all rental units, that would then qualify that entire project, just as Junction Village is not, not Junction Village, the one in West Concord on the Acton line, just as that project was not entirely affordable, all affordable units, because more than 25% were, all of the units counted, I think like 70 units. So it might be worth seeing whether rather than waiting for someone to come to you to spend the money, that you actually look at some of the projects that come before the planning board or the zoning board, and see if buying down a few more units in one of those projects could turn it into a, instead of getting a couple of SHI units, could turn it into a, I realize that really most of the projects that are developed in Concord are for sale, but I don't know. There might be, when we're looking at the land on Upland Road, for instance, the concept of making that a rental development rather than a for sale development could leverage some housing trust money a lot better than having that. It's probably the best deal the SHI offers is the idea that you can get all of the units in a rental complex to count towards, even though a quarter of them are really the only ones that are affordable. So let's say that, I don't know how many units could be done on that Upland Road property, but if there was a project that had a dozen and the developer, just to get his dozen, he was willing to build one or two that are affordable, maybe the money could be used to make the next 2 or 3 units affordable, and then you get 12 units on the SHI rather than a few. So that's my idea for leveraging the trust money.
Yeah, thank you for that. Charles?
I just wanted to say, yeah, along those lines, I think it was about 20 years ago or so that the town of Boxborough, they had a lot of new, because they're on Route 495, they had a lot of new housing going on out there. And they basically were just going in and buying units, market units, and buying them down so that they got a bunch of affordable housing units out of it. So just this is an example.
Yeah, that could be an important strategy. Just to try to just taking a look back at some of the things that folks have put on the table thus far, maybe to try to respond to some of those. A 5-year plan for the trust was something that Rick mentioned, and I think the practical answer is that it would be not yet. That we're sort of, for starters, as has been said, if we've only got $500,000 a year for in the near term, and where frankly we've got at least one project which would use all of that, and is looking for this year's funding and next year's. So if that, and so if the funds were used for that, we're, our short-term plan would not require, we wouldn't have a lot to work with. But even in the longer term, and this, I think this is important, if we want to become the entity that's worthy of having the millions of dollars that the town is intending for us to have, I think that requires us to have a professionally done 5-year plan, monitored and administered by professional planning staff. And what's more, that if the money were coming in, we'd have the ability to pay for it too. We would have the ability to pay for that staff from our Affordable Housing Trust funds. My hope would be that topic can come up. I think the best place for those ideas to gel would be when all the housing entities are getting together to talk about updating the housing production plan to see where do we fit in. Rather than have us come up with our own plan, I think that it needs to be something that everyone is okay with, that all of the housing entities, all the stakeholders, the town itself is okay with the idea that here's a group that's going to have, ultimately, we hope, millions of dollars to spend and is doing what we want them to do, but we want to make sure that they've got the vision that they need to carry it out and the support to do it. So I think that will come. That I think needs to come later, and that's just my opinion on it. We haven't discussed it as a board, but it would be my hope that those topics can get raised and that we can have at least a path forward coming out of the housing production plan process. But in the meantime, we do need to have some kind of guidelines because we're to go by. Because we're going to have we'll have people coming asking for money from the trust because we've got the money, and so I think it's important. It was said earlier, should we? And I've said at our meetings that I feel that we should get the guidelines in place first and then be taking votes on funding projects in that order. That's my personal opinion. But we're proceeding on I would say a fast track or a deliberate track. Certainly our 3 meetings this week with housing boards that we're looking to sort of pull together a draft set of guidelines. My hope would be by January to bring something to the select board and engage with them, and also to be looking back at what what criteria the select board for the cumulative total of 1.5 million, the 500,000 from free cash for 3 years in a row from town meeting, that there was, what were the guidelines that they used? It seems to have been town entities or town staff that came forward with particular projects, and that's fine. But what led some to be approved and others, including yours, not. In that process, so I think that can help. That's an important discussion for us to have as well in the short term. Let's see, other. I think there's been some great ideas put on the table here of things that we might do.
One more comment.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, just, and it's a little off topic also, but you mentioned donations. I also noticed in the Wenham 5-year plan that they, apparently there's some, it's possible that your housing trust may be well positioned to take private donations from actual people rather than the town. I don't know, how at all about how tax deductibility works, but I know that the Housing Authority has always struggled with the idea that someone could donate to us and get a tax deduction. But I noticed that it actually on 2 of the plans that I saw, they mentioned private donations, actually going out and trying to get people to donate land or houses and stuff. And I don't know if we do have a lot of people in town interested in affordable housing. I don't know if any of them are interested enough to donate their house or their land, but it's possible you guys are better positioned than anybody to take a tax deductible donation. I don't know that for a fact, but
Yeah, I think you may be right. Mike Lawson?
I think there was in fact a non-trivial donation of $25,000 to the trust from private citizens in town.
so I guess that could be a thing then. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear. I think we might have been briefed at a meeting a month or so ago about when we were looking what the fund balance might be coming to us. There was identified that there was a private donation made. It's being held in a gift account now. The Carrie LaFleur indicated, and that hopefully can get moved. If so, it could get moved out into the trust now that we have a trust. We're official now. Our trust declaration document has been filed in the Registry of Deeds. So we're a thing now, and the select board did vote at their meeting last Monday night to transfer all of the remaining funds to all the 1.5 million. Any money that's left over is going to us. They had earmarked several pieces for projects that they're approving. Will be the entity that sees those through, but it was about 650,000, I think, of thus far unallocated monies that we would be able to expend, and we're looking at what to request for next year as well. Did I see? I thought I saw other hands. Maybe not. Other comments or things that people want to be sure to mention during our meeting today. You're very kind to give us this time together, and it's already an hour. Stephen.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents on this, for whatever it's worth, is I'm kind of with Stefan on this, and that I think how much funding the trust is able to receive, whether it's through annual appropriation or the recurring funding streams materialize, I think will drive its role. And I think we've talked about this as an individual, a group of individuals. Concord's approach now is, as I guess Lynn and I have talked about this, I think it could be best described as opportunistic in most cases. And and so I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's what we have. You play the hand you're dealt. The market in Concord is very robust and land is very expensive. And so when you have an opportunity that turns into something, you try and jump on it. And I think the guidelines should reflect both a best case, how you handle a best case scenario structured deal, and how you can handle something that kind of falls out of the sky on short notice, kind of like Upland Old Marlboro, something that kind of came along relatively quickly, and now we're working really hard to try and make something out of that. I guess my only suggestion would be, I think as an example, the Peabody, the site of the Peabody School has been talked about in a bunch of different ways. It's been talked about as a great site for affordable housing. It's been talked about as something we should sell for, market rate to offset debt service. It's been talked about, I think, as, retained for field space. It's been talked about a bunch of different ways. I don't know that the neighborhood around there has been talked to about at all, because there's really not a conversation there yet, but you might imagine that they're going to have their views on it. And so I think my advice is, it's not advice, it's a suggestion. And that is, the more the groups affiliated with affordable housing can kind of be on the same page, and whether it's a CHDC unit or a CHA unit, it's all trying to, or a private unit that's being written down by the trust, it's all a win. Because affordable housing groups aren't competing against each other. You're competing against private developers, market rate private developers. And to kind of keep that in mind. And the other thing I would say is try and identify and I don't want to use a competing interest, but identify where there's like an Upland or Marlboro. To me, for that project, it's essential that the affordable housing advocates and the open space advocates work together to determine what's the sweet spot for both. And trying to avoid tribal warfare to the greatest extent possible. Because I'll be honest with you, from where I sit, it seems to be happening on almost everything that is going on right now. And I think it's a sign of the times. I don't think that's unique to Concord, but I think the commitment is there for affordable housing. And so the commitment should be there to kind of do it as a team.
Stephanie?
Yeah, and just to build on that, and actually this relates to the two paths that Stefan talked about, but also Charles's point about the care and feeding of existing units, where, we're continually kind of hitting the wall if we can't afford to essentially buy buy something because it's cost prohibitive, or even creatively buy down something. And that I think there should be room, or I'm hoping, and this maybe I say it, I recommend, or I think the Housing Authority would welcome. I'm not sure I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, but I hope I am. Those dollars to be also used or eased up on in terms of what we might need or others might need to make sure that these affordable housing units are safe and livable.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Other comments, things that people wanted to be sure to mention? Stefan?
I just want to echo what Stephen Crane just said and point out that all the housing entities need to be on the same page, and not only for current projects like Upland Road, but also the zoning discussion for Crosby's Thoreau District, which is coming up tomorrow night. I think that is it's critical for all of the entities to be singing from the same hymnal, as it were.
Thank you. Any further comments? Let me just ask: is the and we had talked about donations of money or donations of land. I think that's something that the trust is empowered to just as the Conservation Commission can acquire land for open space purposes with just the approval of the Select Board, the Housing Trust can acquire property for affordable housing uses just with the approval of the Select Board. Doesn't need town meeting vote. That's something new. It has a downside though, because then it becomes public property, and which limits the ability to the rules for what the costs are going to be in order to develop it. But it's a thing anyway. If that will be new.
Hey, Keith, can I just, because I just to build on that point and go back to a previous point, I do think that the town has the staff and the resources through the RHSO to handle our affordable housing efforts as we sit here today. I do think that the town has done a good job, whether it's the Department of Planning, Land Management, or the RHSO, or partnering with the CHA or CHDC. I do believe we have the pieces in place to really manage the opportunistic and planned affordable housing projects that we have. I don't know that a planner dedicated only to affordability would be a great, we get a lot of benefit from having a full-time position for that. But I just want to give the CHA, my view that I do think we are well-staffed and can handle it. And I think are doing a good job. I mean, like I said, I think it's easy to say we're when you look at the Commonwealth Ave and the sticker shock on that, it's easy to kind of think that that was a setback. In part, yes, but more of a sign of the times in terms of where we are with the unstable market and supply chains and all this other stuff. That hopefully will pass. And I do think that there's a lot of success, both that I look at Christopher Heights as a success. It was a lot of work to get the TIF done, but that's I think a great opportunity for a segment of housing that is under available or has very limited availability. And so there are certain successes that are being had. And I think when you talk about your guidelines, it's, I think a lot of it's going to be subjective, Keith. I mean, I think it's just, it's, how do you know a good deal? What's a good deal? You kind of know it when you see it.
Right.
And I don't know how you frame that. Good luck.
Yeah, I think part of it might be that just in terms of and maybe it just that the trust just sort of needs to identify what resources do we need? What professional resources do we need working with us, sort of staffing us. And I'm not saying that this function needs full-time staff. We may just need some dedicated number of hours that are then purchased, because we've got the money. If we need funds, say, from the regional housing services, or if we need support services rather, and one place to get them is from the regional housing services office, then we ought to put the money on the table now that we have money and say we need it. We need the help. It's not just a volunteer board that we need to be able to have staff support to a degree that meets our needs, for which we are prepared to put money on the table. And no, I'm not talking about a lot of money, but I'm just talking about identifying what the needs are and saying we're not asking for anything for free. We're not asking for volunteer, but we have a budget and we could have some money put on the table. Did I see another hand? Yes, Edward.
As far as the funding for the regional housing coordinator, the town does vote every year at town meeting. A certain amount, I think it's around $35,000 a year. So we are already paying for that professional service. So maybe we need more, maybe to pay a little bit more and get a little more help back from them. I think we already get good help from Liz, but
That's CPA funded, by the way.
Right,
It
it's funded
is
by CPA, yeah, and it may just be that the issue is what's the service level, and it's sort of like contract. When I was managing the town of Littleton, we were not so fortunate as to be allowed into the Regional Housing Services office with Concord and Lexington and the others, that we had to set up our own, and we did it actually by putting it out to contract. It was a CDC that based nearby that provided the service, but we identified what's the funding source that we need annually and the service level, and then put the money on the table. And I'm just suggesting that since we're a new thing, I mean, no one has had to provide staff support for an affordable housing trust in Concord because there hasn't been one. Now that there is one, and now that we're approaching a task in the short term, certainly, but definitely in the long term of being able to do something really big, if the funding occurs, or if we're going to be proactive in going out and looking for more funding. I think that's an important, having that staff support identified, and even if it's just a few more hours a week or something, I think would be helpful. So and something for us to consider. All right, it's 10 after 5. And hoping, and so I'd have to say we've stayed overtime, and I do know that there some on the call have other meetings to go to tonight, even tonight. So we're very grateful that we could all find a time to get together and have this discussion. And let's have more. Let's stay in touch. We're going to be meeting tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and then on Thursday at 2 o'clock with other having this similar conversations with the Housing Foundation and then the Housing Development Corporation. Although that conversation on Thursday will be sort of focused specifically on the Uplands Old Marlboro project that we're trying to get up to speed on. So
This is the part where I say motion to adjourn, right, Keith?
yeah, I see. Yeah, Edward, your
I
hand.
just
was-
want to thank Stephen for his service to the town.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Stephen, for your service as our town manager. It's appreciated. And I saw Mike's hand up.
I was going to second Stephen's motion. to
Okay, the
adjourn.
motion by Stephen Crane to adjourn, seconded by Mike Lawson. And we'll take, and we'll hold that to the side while you have your motion and second on the table at the same time, Rick?
Yes, who would like to move we adjourn?
I move.
Thanks, Ed. A second? Thanks, Stefan. Go ahead and you want to vote yours?
Yeah, we'll vote ours. So on that motion to adjourn, we'll do a roll call. Linda,
Muted.
Still
Muted.
Yeah, Linda, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. And with thanks to everyone for some very good comments today.
Mike,
Aye.
Stephen,
Aye.
and Keith, aye. So the Housing Trust is adjourned. Rick?
We'll take our vote. Rick Eifler, aye. Edward Lerner,
Aye.
Stefan Bader.
Aye, and thank you.
Stephanie Schrobeck
Aye.
and Charles Phillips.
Aye.
Thank you so much, Keith.
Very good. Thank you all. Really appreciate your time. All right.
Thank you. This was
Thank you,
really great.
Jennifer, for being here
Thanks so
today
much.
too.
Yeah, sure.
Of course. See everyone soon. Have a good night.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.